The people of Kanchanpur still remember the ghost. Not by its name, of course, because no one ever knew its true name. They remember it by the way the air changed when it spoke. Before it began killing, it began whispering. And those whispers were enough to make grown men stop breathing for a moment. Enough to make children wake up crying without knowing why. They were enough to make the village dogs hide under beds and refuse to come out, their tails tucked between their legs, whimpering softly. The ghost didn't shout or howl like the spirits in old folk tales. It spoke softly, politely, almost lovingly, and that was what terrified the villagers most. The elders said it first appeared near the old banyan tree at the edge of the fields. A tall, thin figure that looked almost human from a distance, wrapped in something that might once have been clothes, but now hung like memory itself, tattered and gray. Its face was pale, not like death, but like something that had forgotten color. Its eyes were dark and deep as wells that had never known sunlight. And when it spoke, it didn't curse or threaten. It asked questions in a calm, measured voice. "Do you remember me?" It would ask. And the people who heard those words, well, they were never the same again. The ghost didn't kill immediately. It waited. It watched. It learned the habits of the village. It learned the times when the lanterns went out and the rhythms of the farmers returning from their fields. It knew which paths were taken at dusk and which wells were visited at dawn. It was a patient predator, and the entire village of Kanchanpur was its hunting ground. The first to die was Old Man Hemant, the weaver. He was found in his workshop, slumped over his loom, the shuttle still clutched in his hand. There were no marks on him, no signs of a struggle. The doctor who was summoned from the next town over-declared it a heart attack, a natural end for a man of his age. But the villagers knew better. They had heard the whispers the night before, a soft, questioning voice drifting from the direction of Hemant's small hut. After Hemant, it was a young woman named Leela. She was known for her laughter, a sound that used to echo through the marketplace. She was found by the river, her water pot overturned beside her, the wet earth soaking into her sari. Again, no visible cause, just a sudden, inexplicable stillness. The night she died, her husband swore he heard a voice outside their window, a gentle inquiry carried on the breeze. "Do you remember me?" The question was becoming a curse, a harbinger of doom. Fear, cold and heavy, began to settle over Kanchanpur like a shroud. The once lively village square grew quiet. People hurried home before sunset, barring their doors and shuttering their windows. The nightly gatherings around fires ceased. The only sounds after dark were the chirping of crickets and the frantic, terrified beating of hearts. The village elders convened an emergency meeting in the temple. They burned incense and chanted prayers, their voices strained with a desperation that bordered on panic. They were practical men, farmers and merchants, who believed in the sweat of their brow and the turning of the seasons. But this was something beyond their understanding, a malevolence that defied logic. They decided to send for a sadhu, a holy man known for his power over restless spirits who lived in a remote ashram in the mountains. Two of the bravest young men, Ramesh and Suresh, volunteered for the journey. They were given supplies and the blessings of the entire village, their departure watched by anxious eyes. As they left, a cold wind swept through the village, carrying with it a faint, almost inaudible whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. While they waited for the sadhu's arrival, the ghost grew bolder. It no longer confined its whispers to the darkness. People began hearing it during the day, a soft question that would cut through the midday heat. A farmer would be tending his crops and hear it right behind him. "Do you remember me?" He'd whip around, his scythe held ready, only to find an empty field. A woman washing clothes at the communal pump would feel a cold spot on the back of her neck and hear the voice in her ear. The ghost was toying with them, feeding on their escalating terror. It seemed to enjoy the hunt, the slow and deliberate dismantling of their sanity. It was no longer just about killing. It was about breaking them. One evening, a little boy named Arun was playing near the banyan tree, having slipped away from his mother's watchful eye. The other children had long since been forbidden from going near it, but Arun was curious. As dusk painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, he saw the tall, thin figure standing there, just as the stories described. It didn't move towards him. It simply watched. Arun, in his innocence, wasn't afraid. He just stood and stared back. The figure raised a long, slender hand and pointed a finger not at Arun, but past him towards the village. Then the whisper came, clearer than anyone had ever heard it before. "Tell them," it said, its voice a silken thread of sorrow. "Tell them I am still waiting." Arun ran home, his heart pounding not with fear, but with a strange sense of urgency. When Ramesh and Suresh finally returned, they brought with them not a powerful sadhu, but a frail, old woman. Her hair was as white as spun cotton, and her eyes, though clouded with age, held a startling clarity. She was not a holy woman in the traditional sense. She was a storyteller, a keeper of histories that had been forgotten. The villagers were disappointed, some even angry. They had been expecting a man of power, someone who could perform exorcisms and banish the spirit with force. What can this old woman do? One of them muttered, but the elders, desperate, urged them to listen. The woman's name was Shanti. She asked for nothing but a cup of water and a place to sit in the center of the village square. As night fell, the villagers gathered around her, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a single large bonfire. Shanti began to speak, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the tense silence. She told a story not of a ghost, but of a woman named Anaya who had lived in Kanchanpur generations ago. Anaya was a healer, skilled in the use of herbs and ancient remedies. She had mended broken bones and cured fevers, asking for nothing in return. But a plague had swept through the region, a sickness that no one understood. Fear turned to blame, and the villagers, led by a few influential men, turned on Anaya. They called her a witch, claiming she had brought the plague upon them. They dragged her from her home, ignoring her pleas, and took her to the old banyan tree. They did not listen to her, did not remember all the good she had done. They left her there, alone, and she perished, her heart broken not by the plague, but by betrayal. As Shanti finished her story, a profound silence fell over the square. The fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows. And then, from the edge of the darkness, the figure appeared. It walked slowly into the firelight, and for the first time, everyone saw it clearly. It was not a monster. It was the sorrowful specter of a woman, her form translucent, her eyes filled with an ancient pain. It stopped before the fire and looked at the assembled villagers. The whisper came, but this time it was not a question. It was a statement, a lament filled with all the loneliness of forgotten years. "You don't remember me." It was not an accusation, but a simple, heartbreaking truth. They had forgotten. They had erased her from their history, buried her memory under layers of fear and guilt. An old man, the grandson of one of the men who had condemned Anaya, fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his weathered face. "We remember," he cried out, his voice choked with emotion. "Anaya, your name was Anaya. We are sorry." One by one, other villagers began to speak her name, first as a whisper, then louder, a chorus of remembrance. They spoke of the stories their grandparents had told, fragments of a history they had been taught to ignore. With each utterance of her name, the ghost's form seemed to flicker, to become less solid. The deep sorrow in its eyes began to soften, replaced by something akin to peace. The air, which had been heavy and cold, began to warm. The figure of Anaya looked at them one last time, a faint, sad smile gracing its lips. And then, like smoke on the wind, it dissolved into the night, leaving behind only the scent of old herbs and the gentle whisper of the leaves on the banyan tree. The killing stopped. The whispering ceased. The ghost of Kanchanpur was gone, not banished by force, but healed by remembrance. The village learned that some ghosts don't want vengeance. They just want to be remembered. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy tales of folklore and mysteries from around the world, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time. In the heart of a forgotten valley lay Kanchanpur, a village seemingly untouched by time. Life moved slowly here, dictated by the sun and the seasons. But when the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched like long skeletal fingers across the land, the village held its breath. The night in Kanchanpur had secrets. It knew the paths people took home, the whispers shared behind closed doors, and the quiet resentments that festered in the darkness. Then the deaths began. It started slowly, subtly, like a chill creeping into a warm room. The first was an old man, a merchant known for his sharp dealings. He was found in his bed, dead in his sleep. There was no wound on his body, no sign of a struggle. The only clue was the look of unbearable, soul-shattering fear frozen on his face, his eyes wide open as if he had stared into the abyss itself. The village healer was baffled, muttering about a weak heart, but the elders exchanged uneasy glances. They knew fear, and this was something more. A few days later, a woman was discovered at dawn. She was sitting upright near her front door, her back ramrod straight, as if she had been waiting for someone who never arrived. Her eyes were open too, staring blankly at nothing. She had been a notorious gossip, her words often sharper than any blade, sowing discord wherever she went. Again, there was no mark on her, just that vacant, hollow stare. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of the village's calm. Two deaths, both so strange, so unnatural. Whispers started to fly, quiet at first, then more urgent. They spoke of a ghost, a vengeful spirit that had risen to haunt them. Soon, the villagers began to see a pattern, a horrifying logic to the madness. The ghost wasn't choosing its victims at random. It was being selective. It was choosing them carefully. The victims were always those who had wronged someone. The man who had cheated his customers. The woman whose tongue had ruined reputations. A farmer who had diverted water from his neighbor's land during a drought. A lender who had driven families to ruin with impossible interest rates. The ghost seemed to be an arbiter of forgotten justice, a collector of karmic debts. No one dared to say this aloud. To speak of it, to acknowledge the pattern, would be to admit their own guilt, to dredge up their own past sins. Every person in Kanchanpur had a skeleton in their closet, a moment of cruelty, a laugh at another's expense, a time they had turned away when help was desperately needed. So they kept quiet, their silence a heavy, shared burden. Admitting the ghost's motive would be like painting a target on their own backs. As the days bled into weeks, fear became a constant presence in Kanchanpur. It was a physical thing, thicker than the morning fog that rolled in from the hills, heavier than the smoke from their cooking fires. It clung to their clothes, soured the taste of their food, and crept into their dreams. The village was no longer a community. It was a collection of terrified individuals, each locked in their own private prison of anxiety. Half the village died, not all at once in a great cataclysm, but one by one, night by agonizing night. Each death was more terrifying than the last, because the villagers learned something new about their tormentor. The ghost didn't just kill. It spoke to its victims first. Survivors, who had hidden in their homes listening to the final moments of their neighbors, told hushed stories of a gentle voice, almost a whisper, drifting through the walls. Imagine it, sitting alone in the dark, every creak of your home a potential footstep. Then a presence fills the room, a cold spot that makes the hairs on your arm stand up, and a voice, soft and serene, begins to speak. It doesn't shout or threaten. It reminds you. It sits beside you in the oppressive darkness and speaks of moments you've spent a lifetime trying to forget. The lie you told, the trust you betrayed, the kindness you withheld. The ghost was a confessor, but its absolution was death. People began taking desperate measures. They barricaded their doors with heavy furniture, nailed their windows shut, and hung charms and prayers on every surface. They prayed loudly, their voices a cacophony of fear, hoping to drown out the silence where the ghost lived. They stopped visiting each other. They avoided eye contact in the market, afraid that even a simple greeting might invite the ghost's attention. The bonds that had held Kanchanpur together for generations were fraying, snapping one by one under the strain of unrelenting terror. The village was dying, not just in numbers, but in spirit. Hope was a flickering candle in a hurricane. Soon, there were only a handful of people left, huddled in their homes, waiting for their turn. Among them was one man, Rahim. Rahim was a quiet woodcutter who lived at the edge of the village. He was a man hollowed out by grief. Years ago, a sudden fever had taken his wife and young child, leaving him with nothing but memories and an aching emptiness. He had faced the worst life could throw at him and had survived. He had nothing left to lose, and therefore nothing left to fear. He didn't barricade his door. He didn't chant prayers. He simply waited. One night, it came for him. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of his small, sparse hut. It coalesced into a form, indistinct and wavering, a figure made of moonlight and sorrow. The air grew ice cold. Rahim did not scream. He did not run. He simply sat on his mat, his hands resting on his knees, and watched it approach. He listened to the profound silence that accompanied it. The ghost seemed surprised by his calm. It drifted closer, its form solidifying slightly. For the first time, someone was looking at it without terror. Then, the gentle, dreaded voice filled the hut. "Do you remember me?" Rahim looked at the swirling shape before him and answered truthfully, his voice steady. "No, I do not know who you were in life." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "But I know what you have become. You are pain that was never acknowledged. You are suffering that was ignored. You are a wound that was never allowed to heal." The ghost stilled. This was not the reaction it was used to. Rahim did not plead, or bargain, or curse. He spoke to the ghost not with defiance or courage, but with something it had never encountered before: compassion. "You seek peace," Rahim continued, his voice soft. "But you will never find it this way. Killing these people will not erase what was done to you. Every life you take only ties you more tightly to this village, to this earth, to your own suffering. You are forging your own chains with every act of revenge." The ghost, for the very first time since its reign of terror began, fell silent. The whispers that always seemed to writhe around it faded away. No one had ever spoken to it like this. They had feared it, hated it, prayed against it, but no one had ever tried to understand it. No one had ever shown it kindness. In that profound silence, something shifted. The suffocating cold in the room began to recede. The air grew lighter, cleaner. The ghost's shape started to blur, its edges softening, as if it were a memory fading in the sun. It was as if Rahim's words had unlocked something within it, a memory of what it was before it became a vessel for vengeance, a memory of its own humanity. Before it disappeared completely, it spoke one final time. The voice was different now, not a threat, but a sad, solemn warning. It was a whisper of a truth the village had long forgotten, a reminder that the deepest darkness often comes not from ghosts, but from the choices we make and the cruelty we ignore. The final words echoed in the hut, leaving Rahim alone in the quiet, and the village of Kanchanpur was forever changed, not by fear, but by a single act of compassion. Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon for more tales that explore the light and dark of human nature. We'll see you in the next one. Telling Rahim that pain ignored becomes a curse, and that if the living forget this lesson, the dead will always find a way to remind them. And with that, the ghost vanished from Kanchanpur, leaving behind a village forever changed. A village where people began to speak more gently, help more freely, remember more honestly, because they understood now that the ghost had not come to destroy them, but to teach them what happens when cruelty goes unanswered. And even today, when the wind passes through the banyan tree at night and carries a soft whisper through the empty fields, the people of Kanchanpur lower their voices, not in fear, but in respect, knowing that some ghosts leave not because they are defeated, but because their lesson has finally been learned.